Hello, class. Welcome to Howard University College of Medicine. You are freshmen students, and this is the first day of class. My name is Dr. Zaki Sherif. I am in the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. This recording is done on July 16th, 2025. We had our class session this morning, but the recording was not completed, so that's why I'm recording it again. Let's just cover the learning objectives for this class. This is acid-base balance as well as disturbances. So we need to define acid, base, and pH, especially the definition of acid as a proton donor and base as a proton acceptor. Those definitions are based on the Bronsted-Lowry definition, so we'll be using that specific definition for protons, for acids rather, acids and bases from here on. It's also important that we understand the major buffer systems in the body, especially the blood plasma, explain the roles of the lungs and kidneys in acid-base regulation, as well as maintaining homeostasis or equilibrium. We also need to differentiate the four primary acid-base disorders: respiratory acidosis, respiratory alkalosis, metabolic acidosis, and metabolic alkalosis. These are extremely very important to determine and also assess the clinical manifestations in patients. We need to also interpret arterial blood gas, which is called ABG. That helps us to diagnose the underlying cause for these disturbances. We also need to understand the basic principles of compensation and then discuss common clinical causes. So I'm not going to emphasize too much on clinical implications of these acid-base balance or disturbances, basically. There will be a clinician that will be presenting that aspect of the foundational concept. We understand that pH is inversely related to the hydrogen ion concentration. We understand that pH is basically the minus log of the hydrogen ion concentration. In aqueous solutions, we should also understand that hydrogen ion does not exist per se as hydrogen ion. It's always combined with water, so it will always be a hydronium ion. That's why you have H3O plus represented here. And then we also need to know that the normal arterial value, arterial gas, is what we will be looking at. Arterial value basically being the arterial blood value. pH is 7.35 and 7.45. Anything above 7.45 will be alkalosis. Anything under 7.35 will be referred to as acidosis. Both of those are disturbances. We have the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, which is 35 to 45 millimeters of mercury, and bicarbonate being an electrolyte, it will be in the units of milli-equivalents per liter. Okay, so even small deviations in this optimal pH range will cause all kinds of conditions that are or illnesses that will have to be worked out by the doctor. So homeostasis is the whole concept of this acid-base balance. The body needs to maintain its physiological functions and also process biochemical reactions so that the optimal pH range is kept in the blood. You also need to know that certain proteins, if they don't have a certain pH range, they might denature, or the conformational or the configuration of the proteins, three-dimensional structure of them will be disrupted, and the active site will be disrupted, so they may not be able to bind the substrate. So homeostasis is extremely important to maintain the pH range between 7.35 and 7.45. Anything above 7.45 is alkalosis. Anything below 7.35 is called acidosis. Now we have the brainstem here, the medulla oblongata, actually, and this is at the base of the brain, as you can see, the stem, and that is the site for chemoreceptors, especially the central chemoreceptors. So what happens is that if the plasma pH is maybe let's say it is disrupted, or the optimal range between 7.35 and 745 is disrupted, then the lungs will sense that. But it's not just the lungs. There are sensors, very small sensors on the aorta, as well as the carotid artery, will sense in the blood maybe the accumulation of carbon dioxide that eventually forms as acidity, or sometimes you may have too much of bicarbonate floating in the blood, and that may indicate alkalinity. So the sensors, the chemoreceptors or the baroreceptors, sometimes they control. They also sense any kind of changes in the blood pressure. So the kidneys are important for this regulation of the homeostasis in terms of keeping the bicarbonate level within that optimal range. The lungs are important in controlling carbon dioxide level. The liver is also important because sometimes you have gluconeogenesis, basically producing or generating glucose from non-carbohydrate sources like amino acids that it converts to glucose. And then there is a bicarbonate that will be released, and so liver can also be associated with that. But the most important organs we'll be discussing in this acid-base balance, as well as the disturbances, is the OR, the lung, and the kidney. So if you have alkalosis, again, there's a disturbance, and there will be compensatory roles played by these organs. So why is it important that we even look at acid base in this particular lecture? It's because of the constant presence of hydrogen ion in the blood. Okay, has to be maintained to a certain degree. In other words, there has to be a range of hydrogen ion concentration that will not be derailed or disrupted because of certain physiological conditions or external conditions that will affect the body's pH. So pH, as you know, is inversely proportional to the hydrogen ion concentration. So that is the whole idea of maintaining a certain physiologically optimal pH range, in this case 7.35 to 7.45, to process biochemical reactions, to maintain homeostasis, and also avoid any kind of organ failure. So that's basically why we are studying acid-base balance. So what are acids? What are bases? And what is the pH in terms of its definition? So the acid-base balance is the regulation of hydrogen ion. Acid is a proton donor and base is a proton acceptor. And examples are given here. And the definition of pH is a negative logarithm of the hydrogen ion concentration. As we know that a 1 unit change in pH means tenfold concentration of hydrogen ion one way or the other. So it's a logarithmic scale. And so we have definition here. Acidemia is when the blood pH goes below 7.35. Alkalemia, that means alkalinity, going over 7.45. That's very important to understand. Now, how do we maintain pH? The body has three lines of defense. Basically, the defense is against any perturbation, any disturbances to the equilibrium. We'll show you later on what the equilibrium equation is. So the first line of defense is immediate, and that involves chemical buffer systems. Okay, that takes from seconds to minutes. Some examples of those are the bicarbonate buffer system, which is a primary buffer system for maintaining the constant blood plasma within that optimal range. And then you also have the phosphate buffer system, any protein buffer system like hemoglobin is involved in maintaining a certain either depending on whether there's too much acid or it's too much base, it maintains a certain level of involvement in that to regulate the hydrogen ion concentration. You have the respiratory mechanism that basically involves the lung using carbon dioxide as a means of control or regulation. And then the renal mechanism basically uses either excretes hydrogen ions or reabsorbs the bicarbonate ion to maintain the physiological pH range. Now, among all these buffer systems, the bicarbonate, phosphate, and protein, bicarbonate is the most important one for maintaining blood plasma at the optimal level. And by the way, bicarbonate usually is involved in the extracellular fluid, okay, in the blood. And then the phosphate is intracellular fluid. Okay, that's mostly any high concentration of hydrogen ion that brings acidity to that environment, the intracellular environment. Then phosphate binds to hydrogen and soaks it up. So, and then it will be eventually excreted in the urine. Protein, similarly, as you know, proteins also from both sides of the amino acid, the alpha amino end as well as the carboxyl end, they can be protonated and deprotonated, and then hydrogen can be added or be removed to keep the pH optimal. Okay, so that is the important aspect of it. So the first line of defense to maintaining the the pH level within the optimal range is the chemical buffer system. Okay, that is the fastest as well. The second line is respiratory system, basically involving the lungs, elimination or retention of carbon dioxide. And the third line takes the longest time as a renal system, basically controlling the level of bicarbonate ion and sometimes involved in excretion of excess hydrogen ion. So if we focus on the detailed explanation of the immediate response, that means chemical buffer systems. As you know, buffer is any substance that resists any change, especially is important for the pH level in the blood. Bicarbonate, this is the bicarbonate equation. Very important to remember. Now, when we talk about carbon dioxide being involved as the starting material in this reaction or in this equation or something like a reaction scheme, I would like you to remember that we're not talking about carbon dioxide, that we are exhaling in terms of gas being the most important player in this one. Carbon dioxide should also be understood as the byproduct, the waste product of metabolism. And that metabolism takes place in the body. And as you know, whenever we ingest any kind of food, whether fats or proteins or carbohydrates, these are organic molecules. And eventually, when they're metabolized, they will release hydrogen ions, and the hydrogen ions will be carried by the electron carriers like NAD and FAD, which will be reduced. In other words, be carried the hydrogen ions all the way in the electron transport chain to produce ATP. So the whole idea of ingestion of food and the nutrients that we consume would eventually absorb into the intestine, small intestine, and then later on will be distributed by the hepatic portal vein to the rest of the body. Is the byproduct of all that is carbon dioxide. Okay, so I want you to make that clear to yourselves. Okay, so once carbon dioxide dissolves in water, because as you know, blood is about 55% of blood contains plasma, and plasma is about 90% water. So in the blood, basically, water is abundant when carbon dioxide, the byproduct of this metabolism, enters the bloodstream. Then it combines with water to form what's called carbonic acid. It's a weak acid. And this does not stay in that manner for a very long time. It's an acid. It wants to get rid of the proton. And when it does that, it generates a conjugate base, which is bicarbonate ion. Okay, so this is a very important buffering system. And this is what is called the bicarbonate buffer system. And this is the chemical buffer system. And as we mentioned earlier, the lungs are important in regulating the carbon dioxide level, whereas the bicarbonate is regulated in the kidney. I mentioned there are other chemical buffers like phosphate buffer. It is mainly it's involved in the intracellular fluid, okay, in the cells, and then the protein buffer like hemoglobin and red blood cells, and then the plasma proteins like albumin are also involved in maintaining not only the level of hydrogen ion concentration, but albumin, of course, we know is also involved in osmotic maintaining osmotic pressure. So the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation basically is a way to determine the ratio of the bicarbonate ion concentration, which in this case will be in the numerator, which is this one here. A minus is just the conjugate base of the acid, which in this case will be carbonic acid. It could also be the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So it is just a way of relating the pH of a solution, which in this case, of course, is represented by pH here, relating the pH of solution to the ratio of bicarbonate and carbonic acid or partial pressure of carbon dioxide. That's basically what that Henderson-Hasselbalch equation really means. Um, so basically, when you are looking at how much of the pH is changing or is being altered, all you have to do is look at which constituent in this equation or in this formula, which constituent is really being affected. Is it the rise of the bicarbonate ion? If that's the case, being in the numerator, of course, that's going to increase the pH. That means inversely proportionate to the hydrogen ion concentration. So the hydrogen ion concentration will be low, that because the base is going up. And then if you have the weak acid, okay, in this case, carbonic acid, it could be carbon dioxide, because eventually if you look at the equation, carbon dioxide, too much of it will be shifting the equilibrium to the right, making a lot of acid, and acid in this case will be hydrogen ion. So if that's the case, if this increases in the denominator, that means the pH goes down. That means acidity is high, that's hydrogen ion concentration is high. So basically that's what this is all about. So the second line of defense is the rapid pH adjustment by the respiratory system, and thus the lungs, of course, are the ones that handle carbon dioxide. If you have too much carbon dioxide, that is giving rise to acidity, the hydrogen ion concentration at the end of that equilibrium equation. Then the body's compensatory role is to use the lungs to pump out or to excrete as much of the carbon dioxide as possible. That basically means hyperventilation, right? If you have too much retention of the carbon dioxide, that means the shifting of the equilibrium is uh, to the left, right? Because if you have too little of carbon dioxide, that means you want to shift it to the left so that you're trying to make up for that small amount of carbon dioxide that release, that is a condition of which is a hypoventilation. And then the compensatory role will be to increase the production of hydrogen ion concentration, right, by the liver. The liver can not only reabsorb some of the filtrates from the blood, because 180 liters of blood is filtered in the body, and so some of that filtrate will be reabsorbed, and most of it will be reabsorbed, and the bicarbonate will be retained, and sometimes the hydrogen ion concentration also will be increased as a result of this low carbon dioxide level. So that basically is what this is about. And there are chemoreceptors, of course, in the body. The main central chemoreceptors are in the brainstem. The brainstem is surrounded by the cerebrospinal fluid, and they contain sensors in such a way that if there's a carbon dioxide in that fluid that is increased, then that senses the brainstem, the what's called the medulla oblongata, to stimulate the release of chemicals that will induce either a higher rate of breathing or a lower rate of breathing, depending on what is the issue in that, whether it's a high level of carbon dioxide or low level of carbon dioxide. And then for peripheral chemoreceptors, they are basically found in the carotid artery and the aorta, and they sense locally what the gas condition or the gas level is in the blood. So that's how they maintain whether the compensatory response is appropriate for that particular condition. So if we look at the nephron, which is the basic or functional unit of the kidney, you have the proximal convoluted tubule, and they are very much important in the usually when the filtration happens of the blood filtration happens through the glomerulus, and that filtration is not completely wasted. I mean, some of them, up to about 80% or so may be reabsorbed. The water, the nutrients will be reabsorbed, and the rest of them, of course, will be forming in the urine and will be excreted. But then the reabsorbed ones will be mostly in the proximal convoluted tubule will be bicarbonate. Iron is reabsorbed, and then sometimes whatever is left will go down through the lip of Henle, and then make their way to the distal convoluted tubule, and even there will be some kind of reabsorption of what is left of the bicarbonate. So almost 99% of the bicarbonate is reabsorbed. And then you have sometimes you have the hydrogen ion also is absorbed depending on what is needed to compensate. So in this longest adjustment period in the kidney, what is involved is that you have bicarbonate reabsorption, excretion of titratable acids, including phosphoric acid, and phosphate is involved in the intracellular fluid, and so it will be soaking up hydrogen ions if there's too much acidity there. Excretion of ammonium is also part of that filtration system. Now, whenever you have disturbances of this acid-base balance that is derailing homeostasis, then we have other conditions to consider. So before we go to this slide, I just want to go to this one here to give you some kind of scenario. So if there's a pathophysiology, that means the disturbance or perturbance of the acid-base balance is occurring. Let's say accidentally somebody ingests this ethylene glycol, which is antifreeze, and antifreeze is amazing, can be metabolized to oxalic acid, and that's an organic acid that can increase the concentration of hydrogen ions, and then the person eventually may have to hyperventilate because the increase in hydrogen ion concentration, if you look at the the bicarbonate buffer equation, leads to the production and generation of a lot of hydrogen ions, and then the system tries to kind of offset or compensate by shifting the equilibrium to the left. That means by hyperventilation to get rid of as much of the carbon dioxide from that equation or equilibrium equation as much as possible. And so in the beginning, of course, the pH is going to be low because we're talking about high level of hydrogen ions. The bicarbonate level is going to be low as well because the high level of hydrogen ions will be forming or bonding with bicarbonate, and there will not be that much bicarbonate left, so that will be low. And as you know that even though there is a compensation here by the kidney, you still have in that state where the condition is still occurring with her name is Muri, and that is also low. So you have all three of them registering low. And if we move on to Ostesi, he has confusion. He also has some kind of lung response, in this case, not hyperventilation, but hypoventilation. And that is going to produce a certain type of response. Now, what happens is that he has taken antacids because he has duodenal ulcer. So he is trying to kind of offset that condition that he has. And so this antacid is going to cause a rise in the pH because you're removing a lot of the acids out of your stomach, right? So that means you're giving rise to the pH going up because you're reducing the hydrogen ion concentration. And the bicarbonate level is also going up similarly. And then the partial pressure of carbon dioxide also is going up because you're retaining it, you're hypoventilating, you're retaining carbon dioxide within your lungs. You're not releasing it out. Okay, so let's go back to the previous. Let's see if I go back to the, how do I go back to the previous one? Okay, I wanted to go back to the previous slide. For some reason, I guess I cannot do that. Okay, this recording. Okay, well, basically, the previous slide was showing a tube, and within that tube, what you have is a plasma, and in that plasma is where the bicarbonate formation occurs. If you remember the buffer equation, the bicarbonate buffer equation, you have carbon dioxide, CO2, combining with water. Remember that is in the plasma, and plasma is about 90% water. So carbon dioxide, which is a waste product of metabolism, combines with water to form carbonic acid. And that carbonic acid, H2CO3, does not stay there long. It disassociates into hydrogen ion and then into bicarbonate. So in that respect, when you look at the hydrogen ion concentration, if you have too much of hydrogen ion concentration on the right side of the equation, okay, I don't know why I cannot go back to the slide I wanted to show you. Okay, unfortunately, I guess I cannot. Okay, this is being recorded, so I don't want to mess it up. So basically, once you have the too much hydrogen ion concentration, that means there's a lot of acidity in the blood. And if you have a lot of acidity, that means you have a lot of hydrogen ion concentration, which means the pH is going to be lowered, right? You want to maintain a homeostasis or equilibrium. That means you're going to have to offset that excess hydrogen ion, right? To do that, you're going to have to, soak it up. Not soak it up, the bicarbonate will bind to hydrogen and then go into the left. So the equilibrium will be shifted to the left. If you have a lot of base, for example, which is bicarbonate, then again, that will cause alkalosis. We'll talk about that later on. But eventually, you want to make sure that it's also lowered, and then the equilibrium is reached. So that's basically what the slide that I wanted to show you was all about. So let's switch now to arterial blood gas. As you know, let me just see if I can forward this or advance it. Okay, good. So this can advance. So the arterial blood gases are those gases like partial pressure of oxygen, as well as the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and the pH. So it's a test, basically. ABG is a test in the clinic or in the lab, where they want to determine if you have any kind of acid balance disturbances. So they look at your pH for a primary indicator, right? So they want to see in the blood if there is too much acidity, less than 7.35, or too much alkalinity, or less of the hydrogen ion, then that becomes alkalinemia, which is over 7.45. They look at the partial pressure of carbon dioxide and check to see if it is normal, within normal range, 35 to 45 millimeters of mercury. They also look at this bicarbonate, which is a base, the conjugate base of the acid, carbonic acid. And then they look at the metabolic component of that. The normal range is 22 to 26 milliequivalents per liter. Again, we're not using moles per liter because of the electrical charge associated with any electrolyte. It would be positive or negative charge. And then you have the partial pressure of oxygen and the saturation level of oxygen in the blood. And you should have, of course, if you use an oximeter to measure the level of oxygen in the blood, you should have 95% or above if under normal conditions. So the arterial blood gas is what ABG stands for. So a systematic approach to ABG interpretation, the three-step method, is that you analyze it, you check the different concentrations of the hydrogen ion, whether it's normal or not, that's the pH basically. And then you also look at the gases here, PCO2, PCO2. You also look at oxygen, it's not presented here, and then the bicarbonate level. and then you assess exactly what the condition that the patient is in. Now, if we look at each one of those disorders, there are four of them. One is respiratory acidosis. Again, acidosis means that the pH is down, right? The pH is going down. If the pH is going down, that means there's not much carbon dioxide coming from the left side of the equation, right? Not much carbon dioxide here, so the hydrogen ion concentration is low. So pH is down, right? But at this point, the only way to compensate for this in the primary condition, if you have an increased partial pressure of carbon dioxide, right? You have an increased partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So what I said earlier is not correct. So let me regroup myself. So if you have a high level of carbon dioxide, which basically is the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, you will definitely release a lot of hydrogen ions on the right side of the equation, right? I wish I could show you the buffer, the bicarbonate buffer equation. But by now you should have it in your mind. So if you have on the left side of the equation a large amount of carbon dioxide, eventually that will gonna have to be shifted to the right to make a lot of acid or hydrogen ion. A lot of acid is the same thing as a lower pH, right? So you have a lower pH as a result of having. So this is the primary condition. Now, what are the causes for this? Well, if you're retaining a lot of carbon dioxide, in other words, if you're not making the lung exhale carbon dioxide and you're just holding it or retaining it in that kind of fashion, or if you have the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or if you have emphysema, or if you have any kind of opioid overdose, pneumonia that perturbs the gas exchange at the alveolar level, any of those things will cause hypoventilation. You don't breathe that often, and you're not breathing deep in that manner either. So those are the causes for increased retention of carbon dioxide in the blood, and then you have a high level of hydrogen ion concentration. So the compensation is always the other side of the equation. Compensation comes from the kidney. Remember, the kidney takes care of the bicarbonate. It reabsorbs the bicarbonate, so bicarbonate will bind to the hydrogen ion, the excess hydrogen ion, to shift the equilibrium to the left. And then if you do that, you shift the equilibrium. So if you have, let's say, we're having a lot of hydrogen ions, it can excrete it. That's a better way. You excrete the hydrogen ion as much as possible, and then you don't want to overdo it, of course. Or the other thing you can do is reabsorb and generate more of the bicarbonate. Generate more of the bicarbonate, and that will definitely will bind to hydrogen and soak it up. And then the ABG, in this case, will pH 7.35. And then you can have the partial carbon dioxide, 45, and bicarbonate acutely normal. Chronically, if it compensates, so acutely it's normal, you can adjust it back to normal. But if it's a chronic condition, it can increase, right? You can increase the bicarbonate level a little bit and then adjust it in that fashion. So if compensates, that's what this diagram is all about. If we go to respiratory alkalosis, again, don't get too focused on the other names as much as the alkalosis and acidosis. Those are the most important ones because that information is provided to you. That means you already know what the pH level is. It's below, if acidosis below 7.35. If it is alkalosis, then it's above 7.45. So we're talking about alkalosis with the pH going up, right? The pH is going up. Now, if the pH is going up, that means the hydrogen ion concentration is low. Remember, the hydrogen ion concentration is low because alkalinity is what a higher pH level shows. And then the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low. This is the primary condition. Okay, you have a low partial pressure of carbon dioxide. That means it doesn't give rise to the generation of hydrogen ion or acidity. That means the inverse proportionality of hydrogen ion concentration to pH. If you have a low pH, you have a high. You have a low hydrogen ion concentration, you have a high pH. The causes are hyperventilation, you get rid of or excrete, or let's say you get rid of a lot of the carbon dioxide. It could be as a result of panic attack or nervousness and anxiety, what have you. And it could be hypoxia, low level of oxygen in the blood as well. The compensation is always on the other side of the equation, the kidneys, right? What do? They excrete more of bicarbonate ion. When you excrete more of the bicarbonate ion, then that means you're not going to be taking out the hydrogen ion that much. The hydrogen ion stays a little bit there, and then it will be shifted to the left. Now you will increase you increase you will actually stabilize the carbon dioxide level. Then the ABG, the arterial blood gas, will be measured, and you have greater than 7.45. That of course means alkalosis. The PCO2 is less than 35. Remember, it has to be between 35 and 45. So you have less of it here, as is shown here. And then the bicarbonate level could be normal, but if it's chronic condition, then you will have it low. And that's what this diagram shows and help you understand better. Now, if we come to metabolic acidosis, this is what's happening on the right side of the equation. Acidosis again means that the pH is low, a lot of acid in the blood. And then the primary condition could be here, bicarbonate level is low. If that's the case, then you also have a low pH. That means a higher level of hydrogen ion concentration. Now, if this could be an ingestion, as I mentioned earlier, you can be ingesting accidentally ethylene glycol, which is an antifreeze. Or you could also have lactic production, a lot of it because of exercise that you're doing. You could also have ketoacidosis, especially diabetic ketoacidosis. That means if you are generating energy, not from glucose, but from ketone bodies as a result of fatty acid oxidation. And then if you're consuming too much alcohol, all of these things will lower the bicarbonate level, at the same time lower the pH as well. And you have the bicarbonate loss, especially if you have a lot of diarrhea, that you're basically excreting a lot of bicarbonate. And then you have renal tubular acidosis, is something that we mentioned earlier when we looked at the nephron. You have the proximal convoluted tubule, which basically filters the glomerulus filters it, but then it goes through the proximal convoluted tubule to harness the nutrients back or to reabsorb the bicarbonate because you're losing a lot of it anyway in your stool. So the compensation again, the lungs increase ventilation to blow off those hyperventilation and rapid. That's metabolic acidosis. Now, when we talk about metabolic acidosis, there's a little twist here, a wrinkle, shall we say. It is acidosis because the pH is going down, the hydrogen ion concentration is going up for sure. But a key discriminator in this particular condition is what is called the anion gap. What is an anion gap? Basically, it just tells you an anion is that negatively charged ion, right? So if you have the electrolytes that are also influencing the blood plasma pH, in this case, we're talking about the cation that's most represented in this electrolyte balance is the sodium ion, and that's the cation. And then you subtract the concentration of sodium ion, and then you subtract the from sodium ion, you subtract the chloride concentration as well as the bicarbonate concentration, because these two are the anions, right? These are the electrolytes, of course, that are measured in concentration of milliequivalents per liter, but they're anion, so they have they factor into that equation, or that what's called anion gap. That means you'll always have more of the sodium ion, and the normal range is 8 to 12 milliequivalents per liter, right? If you have in the blood a lot of sodium ion, and you have to know in milliequivalents per liter how much that is, it's going to be much higher than either one of the chlorides or bicarbonate. And then you subtract from the sodium the anions, the sodium being the cation, then you will have 8 to 12 milliequivalents. And it varies from lab to lab because some of them also add to the cation potassium. Potassium is such a small amount, it's negligible amount. A lot of the labs do not even include it in the calculation. But it's the normal range between 8 and 12 milliequivalents per liter. But the high anion gap that can go beyond 12 milliequivalents per liter, that causes acidosis, and that particular acidosis is only relevant when we talk about metabolic acidosis. Now, the anion gap does not factor in the respiratory acidosis. Okay, I just want to make this clear. It only factors in the metabolic acidosis. Why? Because at least in respiratory acidosis, we know where the hydrogen ion concentration elevation comes from. It's coming from the byproduct of this waste, right? Which is the byproduct of waste is carbon dioxide. It's coming from carbon dioxide of metabolism, right? But in the case of the metabolic acidosis, the hydrogen ion concentration or the acidity of the blood can be increased by not just carbon dioxide coming from the left side of the equation, but it could also come from other acids because it is metabolic function. It's not a respiratory function. It's a metabolic function. You could have, lactic acid also coming into um, donate hydrogen ion uh, through exercise, and or you can have um, uh, maybe organic acids like we mentioned earlier. Ethylene glycol is metabolized to oxalic acid, and you have fumaric acid also. The metabolite of fumaric acid is methanol. Of course, people do not consume these toxic acids, deliberately, but it could be accidental, right? So that raises the hydrogen ion concentration in the blood. That's what's called acidosis. So the reason you do the anion gap is that if the anion gap, when the ABGs are done, and then they also look at the differences between the electrolytes, under perfect condition, you would have the negatively charged anions and the positively charged cations, the concentration of all of those will be equal. So the negatively charged will have the same concentration in milliequivalents per liter to the positively charged ones under perfect condition. But if there's a gap, you need to know what is contributing to that hydrogen ion excess. Okay, the excess of hydrogen ion, is it coming from organic acid other than carbon dioxide? And then if that's the case, the anion gap has gone beyond the normal limit, is gone beyond 12 milliequivalents per liter, then that is metabolic acidosis caused by the anion gap. Okay, let me move to the next slide. I hope everything I'm saying is being recorded. So metabolic alkalosis, so the reason we took a little bit of roundabout for the metabolic acidosis because we have the anion gap that has to be also incorporated into that understanding. Now we go to metabolic alkalosis. Alkalosis basically means alkalinity in the blood that eventually leads to alkalemia. That means in the blood you have a lot of bases, or at least let's not look at in terms of bases. Let's look at whether there's an increase in acidity, that means hydrogen ion, or there's a decrease in acidity. That means lowering of hydrogen ion concentration because we're talking about pH. So let's stick to that. So here in alkalosis, of course, the pH is going to go up, right? Because alkalosis means alkalinity. That means the hydrogen ion concentration goes down, and inversely, the pH goes up. And then you also have bicarbonate level going up. Okay, so metabolic in this case refers to the kidneys regulating the bicarbonate level, and this, of course, as you know, in the bicarbonate buffer system, this is the conjugate base for carbonic acid, right? So if the bicarbonate level is going up, then we're not talking about compensation here. We're talking about the primary condition here. All right. So the hydrogen ion loss, there is a loss of hydrogen ion. Could it be because there is some damage to the kidney, that they're excreting too much hydrogen ion, they're not retaining or they're not reabsorbing the hydrogen ion? Could it be that there are certain, reflexes like vomiting? You get rid of a lot of the acidity when you're vomiting. Or could it be other diuretics that you're taking, that you're releasing a lot of water through urine? Because you have certain, maybe you have high blood pressure, or maybe accumulating, or edema in some parts of your body. So you want to get rid of a lot of water, but along the way, you also get rid of a lot of hydrogen ions. So, that means you increase the pH level here. The bicarbonate gain antacid, we used, if we use antacid, of course, you get rid of the acid. And then that means you can, or you can use, you can actually abuse that antacid for alkali administration. Some people have certain plants that they consume, and they may have that kind of alkalinity that's imposed upon their blood system. But then the compensation is that the lungs again are called for, because they are on the other side of the equation, the bicarbonate equation. And then this lungs decrease the ventilation, so they maintain carbon dioxide level, retain it, so that it can shift the equilibrium back to the right to produce acidity. So this is what you see here, and this is just for you to understand exactly what's happening. And then again, you can look at this chart and see exactly what the condition is for any of the disturbances, and what happens to the pH, the carbon dioxide, the partial pressure of that, the bicarbonate level, and then the causes. And this summarizes everything we've just discussed. That should do it. And I hope that the understanding is the foundational understanding of acid-base balance will really be appreciated enough, so that when you encounter other conditions in the body, you can always remember that this may be the what's called the basic metabolic panel that you want to look at to assess and then maybe diagnose the patient's particular condition. Well, take care. I hope this has recorded. This is recorded, I hope. All right, bye-bye.